thanks for joining Sapelo Nerds, a coastal science podcast. I'm your host, Corinne.
And I'm your host, Brittany. And we work at the National Estuarine Research Reserve, or NER, on Sapelo Island, a Georgia barrier island.
Hi, and thanks for joining Sapelo Nerds, a coastal science podcast. I'm your host, Corinne.
And I'm your host, Brittany. And we work at the National Estuarine Research Reserve, or NER, on Sapelo Island, a Georgia barrier island.
So today's title is just a little dramatic.
Is it, though? I mean, we're kind of known for reasonable, not at all ridiculous titles.
Right. True, but our episode's title today is Invasion of the Soil Snatchers. Is that plant horror?
Well, while it may seem a little dramatic, it's really not dramatic enough. Today we're diving into a topic that's both fascinating and really concerning. Invasive plants on Georgia's barrier islands.
I guess that is true. Most people don't realize how dire the invasive species issue is in coastal Georgia. We have talked a little about feral hogs and invasive animals, but plants are really where the threat gets ignored sometimes. After all, we do have that defined phenomenon of plant blindness.
Yeah, I think my cousin had that. Like, all he could see was the color green.
Not quite. That sounds like a personal issue.
Probably true. He's a little strange.
So, plant blindness is this phenomenon of not recognizing or acknowledging the plants around you. Most people don't notice our plant diversity. It's pretty special that Georgia and Alabama are actually tied for the highest diversity of trees in the United States.
Wow, that's pretty special. So, listeners, I want you to take a second and look around at all the plants near you. Or, I guess, as you're zooming by if you're driving. Have you ever noticed them before? Can you identify any of them? What about their scientific names? If you answered no, then you may have plant blindness. Recommended treatment includes nature bathing, forest walks, and consulting your local naturalist.
And you can even come visit us. Our barrier islands are renowned for their unique ecosystems, including some awesome plants. But invasive plant species are posing significant threats. Let's start by defining what we mean by invasive plants.
Yeah, that's a good point, Corinne. Invasive plants are species that are not originally found in, or I guess native, you could say, to a particular region. And they tend to spread very rapidly in a new ecosystem, causing harm to the environment, even the economy, and human health. They are not just taking over soil space, even though that's a huge problem. Sometimes these plants are outcompeting or even at times releasing chemicals into our soil. And that causes havoc to the native plant species and native animals.
On just Sapelo and the surrounding barrier islands, we've seen several invasive species making an impact. Two of the most problematic are the Chinese tallow tree, Triatica cibifera, and Japanese climbing fern, Lagodium japonicum.
Well, let's talk about the Chinese tallow tree first. This species was originally introduced in the United States in the 1700s for its oil-producing seeds. And like how most invasive species start, it was an attractive ornamental plant that several people thought looked good in their manicured lawns. People like this plant because of the popcorn-shaped flowering buds, which are seen in the spring. And that's kind of how this tree got the nickname of the popcorn tree. Unfortunately, it's become highly invasive, especially in coastal areas, that are very similar to its homeland in China.
According to a study published by the University of Georgia, the Chinese tallow tree spreads rapidly in wetland areas, outcompeting native vegetation like Baccharis species and important food sources for native animals, like the live and swamp oaks. The Chinese tallow or popcorn tree forms dense monocultures, or single plant areas, that alter soil chemistry by releasing chemicals into the neighboring soils, which not only alters the soil composition, but also the hydrology, which negatively affects native plants and animals. It basically soaks up a ton of the water, making it unavailable for these native species.
Yeah, and it's not just the plants that are impacted. Wildlife that depends on native flora for food and habitat is also affected. For instance, the altered plant community can disrupt the entire food web, impacting everything from insects to birds.
We see that often with lantana, or the equally invasive Japanese honeysuckle.
Ugh, lantana.
One of your favorites, huh?
A favorite to hate. I think all of my least favorite species are also the ones I see the most often in lawn and garden stores being sold like they aren't the most devastating species ever to our coast.
It can be really tough to convince people that the species they see for sale in Lowe's or Home Depot are actually horrible for the environment.
Well, I mean, after all, Corinne, there's pretty pictures of butterflies on the label, and it's touted for being a pollinator plant.
Of course, if there's pretty pictures on it, we're good, right?
Yeah, wrong.
I hate when I see community landscaping with lantana. And you may be asking, well, why are stores allowed to carry these plants? Why are landscapers able to put these overgrowing nightmares in people's yards, furthering the spread? Well, it's a very complicated answer, but right now there's very limited legislation on invasive plants and even less repercussions for companies who knowingly plant plants that will become unmanageable and therefore require more money from homeowners into landscapers' pockets.
And I do want to be really clear, we do want to stress it's not just landscapers. There are a lot of really good and reputable landscapers out there. But a lot of the time what I see and deal with is just a general lack of knowledge on the subject. They're not trying to do harm. Which is why the Sapelo Island National Estuarine Research Reserve is partnering with the Georgia Department of Natural Resources, the Jekyll Island Authority, and the University of Georgia's County Extension offices through our local SISMA.
Sis what?
Yeah, it's a little confusing, but Kojo SISMA is not a cool new bar in town. It's actually the Coastal Georgia Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area, Kojo SISMA, which is basically a bunch of people coming together to combat the invasion of nasty plants in our area. We're working with these partners to design public works training and trainings for landscapers and landscape designers about these plants.
And why we'll probably have many, many more ranting podcast episodes about it.
Yes! To the last lantana!
But we also mentioned the Japanese climbing fern. This invasive species poses a different set of challenges. The fern spreads by spores and can quickly cover and kill native plants, including trees, by blocking sunlight and adding weight that can cause structural damage.
And research from the University of Florida highlights that Japanese climbing fern can alter fire regimes in the forested areas. Its dense mats can carry fire into the canopy, which increases the severity and spread of wildfires.
That's particularly alarming for barrier islands, which are already vulnerable to storms and rising sea levels. Adding more intense wildfires to the mix is a recipe for disaster.
So, what is being done to combat these invasive plants? Well, there are several strategies, including mechanical removal, chemical treatment, and biological controls. Each method has its pros and cons.
Mechanical removal involves physically pulling or cutting the plants. While effective for small infestations, it's really labor-intensive and can be impractical for larger areas.
And chemical treatments, such as herbicides, are often used but can have some unintended side effects on non-target species and the broader ecosystem, particularly if people are not trained to use those properly. It's a delicate balance to maintain.
One promising approach is the use of biological controls, which involves introducing natural predators or pathogens to control the invasive species. However, this method requires extensive research to ensure that the control agent doesn't become a problem itself.
The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has been investigating potential biological control agents for both the Chinese tallow tree and Japanese climbing fern. Early trials show promise, but they're going to be doing a lot more research to understand long-term impacts before releasing statements on what exactly they think works best. I actually use biological control agents at my house, including nematodes and Carolina mantis and native ladybugs to control pest species without pesticides in my garden.
It's clear that managing invasive plants on Georgia's barrier islands is a complex challenge that requires coordinated efforts between scientists, conservationists, and policymakers.
Absolutely. Public awareness and involvement are also crucial. Simple actions everyone can do, like cleaning gear that's been outside, including your boats, to help prevent the spread of seeds and spores, can make a huge difference. And for those living near the coastal area, participating in local eradication efforts or volunteering with conservation groups like Coastal Wildscapes or the Native Plant Society chapter in your area can help to protect these unique ecosystems. We even have our own coastal cowboy posters on what invasive species we see most often planted in people's yards. And our intern, Juliana, has been tackling a pretty innovative project to help educate people about invasive species.
Did someone say innovative invasives?
Say that 5 times fast. Welcome, Juliana. You want to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Hi, my name is Jules. I'm a biology major at University of West Georgia. I'm originally from Dallas, Georgia, and I'm excited to be here on Sapelo as the Coastal Science Communication Intern for the Reserve.
So, Jules, you started out on Sapelo at UGAMI first, and then I recruited you. Do you want to talk about how you came to Sapelo to begin with?
Yeah, I was looking for more marine biology courses, and since I'm kind of in the middle of Georgia, there's not a lot of water to do so. So I saw that UGA was doing a study away program, and it was centered around marine biology and ecology, and I took a chance.
That's awesome, and we're so glad you did. Your project on the island is a little different. Can you explain what you're doing and how it works?
Yes, so since not a lot of people know what exactly is invasive species versus native, I decided to do a virtual walkthrough of our nature trail and show examples of not only the native species that are good, but also some of the invasive species that are on the island and what we can do to point them out and get rid of them.
That's awesome. So, what are some plants that you're seeing out there you would call the worst offenders?
Well, your favorite, lantana, some Chinese tallow, mimosa trees, and the Cherokee rose, which unfortunately is the Georgia state flower.
Ugh.
Yes.
Yes, we love to praise Georgia, except when we make the state flower an invasive species.
Uh-oh.
We do actually have a bill in to change it to a version of the magnolia, so hopefully that passes. And we're so fortunate to have you helping us out, Jules, with this project. So what has been the best part of working on the island?
Besides being on an island, it has to be just being exposed to wildlife constantly. Everywhere you look, you will see at least one form of animal.
All right. Well, we love working with you. And thank you so much for coming on today.
Yes, the opportunity has been unbelievable.
See? You fit right in. So do you know what the pine tree's least favorite month is?
I don't know. When?
September!
No! Wow, well, since we're going all in there, what did my favorite native fruit, the muscadine vine grape, say when it got stepped on?
I don't know. What?
Nothing. It just let out a little whine.
For more information about any of the topics we covered today, or to submit your question that may be featured in our upcoming episodes, please email us at signer.socials@gmail.com. That's SINERR.socials@gmail.com.
Thank you for listening to Sapelo Nerds, a coastal science podcast brought to you by the Sapelo Island National Estuarine Research Reserve. Please check back for more episodes released each month. And we really need reviews, so, leave us a couple of good ones. Really good ones.
And that's the Sapelo Sound.
For more information about any of the topics we covered today, or to submit your question that may be featured in our upcoming episodes, please email us at signer.socials@gmail.com. That's SINERR.socials@gmail.com.
Thank you for listening to Sapelo Nerds, a coastal science podcast brought to you by the Sapelo Island National Estuarine Research Reserve. Please check back for more episodes released each month. And we really need reviews, so, leave us a couple of good ones. Really good ones.
And that's the Sapelo Sound.